Welcome to Tilly's Trans Tuesdays. This week we discuss something that hasn't left the news any time in recent memory, and it's one of those hot-button issues that honestly and truly shouldn't be an issue at all. Here's Trans Kids 1, Facts and Dangers. Hi, I'm Tilly Bridges, your host, and I'm joined by my writing partner, my best friend, my wife, our token cis representation, a lady who looks good even in bad lighting, Susan Bridges.
Hello! That is not true. Everyone looks bad in bad lighting. Everyone.
Our guest this week is Karla, a freelance writer who is also a wonderfully supportive mom to a trans kid. Welcome, Karla.
Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so most of our guests on the show are trans folks, but I didn't want to bring a trans kid on the show because that kind of exposure would be too much for them. And honestly, it's not something they should have to deal with, especially given all that we're going to be talking about and how rough this world can make things for trans kids. But you and I have known each other for a few years, and I've sort of watched your experience with a trans kid as it grew and changed, and you maybe had questions about trans things or needed a bit of a sounding board. And so I'll have some questions for you about your specific experience raising a trans kid as we go. But before we dive in, I just wanted to thank you for being willing to come on the show to talk about it because it's so important. And thank you for being the parent your trans kid needs. It's literally life-changing to have that kind of support.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been one of the things that has guided me through all the chaos that it is happening in our world and even before things got crazy, to just try to make sure that she has the support she needs to be whoever she wants to be.
Yeah, and that's from somebody who did not get that as a kid. It's huge. It's so huge. So never discount how important it is. You're amazing.
Thank you. So are you.
Oh, wow, thank you. You're amazing too. We could all be amazing.
Okay.
All right.
All amazing. Amazing all around.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So the first thing you need to know, like Karla just mentioned, is that yes, trans kids exist. And yes, kids can know who they are even from a very young age. If they are in an open, accepting, and loving environment, they may even trust you enough to tell you about it. And trans kids are as stable in their identity as their cis peers are. Cis kids know who they are, not trans, and trans kids know who they are too. Here's a quote from a link to a study in the show notes. Quote, "The research spanning from 2013 to 2024 and involving over 900 young people across North America found that more than 80% of participants, both cis and trans, remained comfortable with their expressed gender identity throughout the study. Notably, trans youth who transitioned in childhood showed no higher likelihood of regret than cisgender youth. When changes in identity did occur, they were more often shifts toward non-binary identification rather than a return to birth-assigned gender," end quote. As I just mentioned a second ago, I did not have that kind of childhood. Though the word trans was never spoken, my mother and stepfather were deeply homophobic, and anytime I displayed even the tiniest hint of anything girly, I was ridiculed and made fun of and yelled at and punished for it. And yeah, friends, that's transphobia, even if my mother also didn't consciously know who or what trans people were. For the record, I suspect my mother was so deeply transphobic because she herself was some flavor of trans or non-binary and was raised to hate and fear those things in herself. I talked about that in episode 19 on trans parents and Mother's Day. I didn't know I was a trans kid, even though the signs were all there, and I can see them so easily when I look back now. Even though so many of my memories are lost to me thanks to dissociating through my gender dysphoria, which we talked about in episode 59, I remember so many little things that were indications of my truth shining through. For more on that, check out episode 6 on the signs were always there that we're trans, and episode 16 on searching for meaning when you're trans and don't know it. And if you don't think this is something all of society does to all of us all the time, let gendered childhoods in episode 50 and trans trauma to societal gaslighting in episode 95 enlighten you as to all the ways our society forces compulsory cisgender heterosexuality on everyone.
So, speaking to what you just said about like how we're just inundated with
Yeah.
what boys and girls are supposed to be. So, Jules is trans and she's always been into all the colors, but as she got older, she again, I think that inundation of like this is what boys like and this is what girls like is even impacting her because she used to
Yeah.
love the color blue, used to be like her favorite color, and now she's like I can't like the color blue because only boys like blue, and so I
Mm,
like pink now and pink is now my favorite color. And of course I've been like any colors don't have gender, you can wear whatever
right.
you want, your friends are certainly not as into pink as you are. And I don't know if a lot of that is not just what she's getting inundated with, but also just because she wasn't always fully supported by other people in her life, if she feels this need to overcompensate in some way.
Yeah. There's this thing I think that most trans people, even those of us who transition as adults, go through, where you feel like for me as a trans woman, well, I have to dress as femme as possible. I have to wear makeup every time I go out. And part of that is so that you get gendered correctly because the misgendering hurts so much. But part of it is like you feel like you're not being quote unquote the right kind of, woman or man or what have you if you don't conform to these stereotypes. And it's awful. And that's actually the thing I wanted to ask you about is, do you feel like you were as aware of how much society bombards us with that prior to Jules telling you that she was trans or figuring out, who she really was? Like, did you notice as much, or was it her sort of coming out to you that sort of helped you see all the ways society forces these things on us?
I would say I was somewhat aware because I've always been kind of the kid that was always told I was a tomboy because
Mm,
I
sure.
wasn't very feminine leaning when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And I had maybe like a period of time where I was more girly, but otherwise I'm kind of like the Doc Martin hat, you know. It was actually interesting during COVID when I would wear a mask because I guess of how I dressed, I was constantly mistaken for a man just because
Wow.
of how I was dressing, because I
Yeah.
was wearing like the jeans and the docs and the hat, and somehow the mask was enough of a visual change for people to be like, oh, you're a boy.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. But I think what made me sort of start to realize it even more was just when she was a baby. There's so many people take their cue on who you are by your hair. The
Yeah.
hair is such a big factor. So like she was blonde, very blonde as a baby, blue eyes. And even if she was wearing like at that time a top that said like daddy's boy or whatever it was like, oh, she's a girl. And it was just the visual cue of the blue eyes and the blonde hair. And as she got older, because her hair was longer, and I have a lot of friends who have like boys that just like their hair long, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, well, it's a girl because the hair is long. Like it doesn't matter like what else they're wearing. It's like adults seem to really hone in on the hair as like the
Yeah.
big visual confirmation for kids, which is so interesting. They probably don't even realize that that's what they're doing.
Yeah. I remember I have, like, a lot of brothers and sisters that I'm much older than, and I remember when some of them were babies, and I mean, I was still a kid, but I was just, like 8 years older than the next closest to me, and depending on, like, even if they didn't have very long hair as a baby, depending on what color clothes my mother dressed them in that day, if we went to the store, people would be like, "Oh, what a cute boy," because the shirt wasn't pink, you know what I mean? And it was just so wild that people just make
Yeah.
these rapid assumptions about gender. Like, why does it even matter? You could just be like, "That's a cute baby." You don't have to say boy or girl, They'd
Hmm.
be like, "Oh, that's such a cute girl." I'm like, you don't have to do that. And that's the thing I've noticed even more, coming out as an adult is that the rapid pace that people will just see you and make a snap judgment about your gender based on who knows whatever criteria their brain is using. And so the thing I always remind trans people of is that if you get misgendered, it is about the person who misgendered you, and it's not about you and the way you present. You be who you are, and that's their problem if they're getting it wrong. I mean, it hurts, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that was a big motivating factor, I think, for my kid was when she changed her name,
Yeah.
was because it was people were just assuming, and it's not like her original name isn't used by both genders, but it's more often used by boys. And so a lot of it was like, well, why do you have a boy's name? Why do you have a boy's name? And so she was taking that to mean they saw her as a boy, which
Right.
I don't think that's what was happening. I think it was more like, well, I don't understand why you have a name that doesn't match with what I'm seeing in front of me. But it
Right.
was enough of like, and we have this great book, which I don't know if you're aware of, and I can try to find it in the bedroom. It's called Me and My Dysphoria Monster.
Oh,
And it's a
I'm
kid's
not aware
book.
of that.
It is so awesome. And, it was just bringing out that dysphoria monster for
Yeah.
her when people were questioning why she had this name that didn't match what they thought in their head was what the name should be.
Yeah, that's gotta be so hard for a kid, especially because it's so much harder. It's hard for me to understand as an adult, right? It's taken me years to try to figure this all out. So for a kid, it's gotta be even tougher.
I was thinking about the pink cup.
Oh, yes. You wanna tell that story real quick?
So, when our kid was younger,
Hmm.
we went to the zoo with the grandparents.
Your parents. Yes.
And they wanted to buy our kid something.
Like a souvenir
Yes.
from the gift shop.
And he picked a pink cup, and they freaked out because it was pink. And I was like,
Right.
"What is wrong with
It's
you?
a cup.
It's a
It's a
cup."
cup.
He thought it was cool.
Like,
Let him have a cup.
what is and it just burns me so much, especially you hear so much about kids, like, being at, like, a comic store, not being allowed to buy a girl's comic or not being and it's just like,
Yeah.
it's reading. You want children to read.
Yes.
Let them read what they want.
Right.
Maybe this is related to our middle grade girl space adventure that will be out at some point, and some boy will be united. I will be very angry.
Yes.
It's a great book.
Well,
They're gonna love it.
2027. Stay tuned, folks.
Stay tuned. Okay.
Well, being a trans kid who didn't know she was trans, who was punished for being different for her entire childhood, severely messed me up. All of my childhood and pre-transition adulthood is tainted by the horror of my dysphoria. I lost memories from most of my childhood because of it. I had my childhood stolen from me because of it, and that is something I've said a lot in these episodes, and it's true. What society does to trans kids when it punishes them and forces them to suffer does a lifetime's worth of damage to a human being that's very likely already suffering a whole lot. You don't need to have dysphoria to be trans, by the way, but many of us, or even most of us, do. It's affected me so deeply that there's already 5 episodes and essays about the ways it's impacted my life and given me a lifetime of trauma. See The Past and Why It Haunts Us in episode 2, The Past 2, The New Past, when a TV show gave me back part of my childhood, and episode 118, The Past 3, which is also Trans Grief 1, and The Past 4, which is Trans Grief 2, when fake childhood school photos also gave me back a part of my childhood. And those were episodes 48 and 49. And then The Past 5, Recovering Trans Childhoods, which covers why many trans people may gravitate toward toys and things for kids more so than you might think, in episode 109. So if it is possible to prevent a person from having to deal with a lifetime of pain and trauma, isn't that something you'd want to be sure you do for your kids? It seems pretty simple. But so many people fall for the propaganda, just like they do for trans sports, like we talked about in episodes 125 and 126.
So like the trying to avoid trauma, right? So like
Yeah.
part of for me, part of what motivated me with protecting my kid
Yes.
and making sure that she felt supported was that I didn't always feel supported in my own childhood for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
And I wanted to make sure that she didn't have that. And so like part of what sucked was like, the people I was around who knew what my childhood was like, which was not great. And so I'm trying to support my kid and they're not supporting. And so it's like, even though I was trying to protect her, as you're
Yeah.
talking about, and avoid sort of that trauma, it's like it happened anyway, despite my best efforts, because of people, like you said, who just felt like they knew better for
Right.
whatever variety of reasons. But, the only saving grace I have in it is that my support has always been consistent, persistent, so to speak, throughout
Yeah.
it. And I just have to hope that that is enough, so to
Yeah.
speak.
Yeah, I mean, having anybody that supports you fully like that all the way through it's huge. It makes so much of a difference. And I wanted to ask you here, not so much about your kid's transition just yet, but like what was she like pre-transition and how did she come to realize that she was trans and what was that whole experience like for you?
So she was very young. She was about, I want to say 3 was when I
Wow.
noticed she was kind of, there were 2 things that made me kind of realize that something might be going on in her head.
Yeah.
One was she was, actually 3 things. There's 3 things that were going on. So she's never liked playing with boys, ever.
Okay.
She just always has gravitated more towards playing with girls. And I don't know that that's has anything to do with her gender or
Sure.
not, but that was always something I noticed, that she just always gravitated towards wanting to be around girls and not around boys. And then there was like what you would probably think of as like normal gender exploration at that age, like wanting to have the nails painted, the
Sure.
hair, necklaces, things like that, bright, colorful clothes. Because, of course, like once you hit a certain age with kids' clothes, it's like you can see the drastic difference where it's
Yep.
like as babies, it's more like happy. And then it starts to get like the boys' clothes start to get more like dull and not as
Yep.
like vibrant and full of life. And then the girls' clothes are all like, wee.
Yeah.
And then there was this one incident that happened. We were at my in-laws, and she was the kid that like I would let her hair grow out.
Yeah.
And they live in the woods, so ticks. And she got a tick that kind of just burrowed into her head that we found there.
Oh
And
no.
so, every once in a while, and again, this is like COVID. I think we were already like into like COVID at this point. And obviously wasn't taking her to the hairdresser at that point. And
Yeah.
so I probably hadn't cut her hair on my own, done like the COVID cut in like 6 months or something. So I was like, okay, we're just going to do a COVID cut. And so I cut her hair like super short, like what I had
Yeah.
done in the past. And she was really upset about it. Not like to the point
Oh.
of tears. She wasn't like crying, but she definitely pushed back in a way that that she hadn't previously, where she was just like,
Yeah.
I didn't want my haircut. I don't want my haircut. I want my hair to grow long like Rapunzel. I want Rapunzel like hair. And so it's like we've never cut her hair short since then, since she was 3.
Yeah.
Like it's almost down to her butt at this point. We just trim it. And so that was like, my first clue. And then because she was wearing this like kids jewelry all the time, even though she was dressing in like what you would consider traditional boy clothes as far as like the colors, shirts, pants, all that stuff at that point, she was still getting, and she had the short hair, she was still getting mistaken for a girl. And it was causing a lot of confusion for her.
Sure.
And I felt like this confusion was like something I needed help addressing that I didn't necessarily have the tools to address. I didn't want to necessarily like feel like I was doing this with what was happening. So there's this
Yeah.
book, I have it somewhere in my room. It's called It Feels Good to Be Yourself. Do you guys know this one?
No.
So I'd asked around for like books that might kind of explain things, because I have friends who are trans, who are non-binary. So
Yeah.
I was like, all right, let's read this book to her. And it's this really great kids book with all these beautiful, beautiful illustrations. And this was when she still allowed me to read to her. And I'm sitting on the couch downstairs and she's sitting in the chair next to me, and I read the book, and it kind of talks about the gender rainbow.
Yeah.
It talks about all these different kids and what their gender identity is, but in a language that's like easy enough for a kid who was like 3.5 at that point to understand.
Right.
And I read the book to her, and I closed the book, and she just sat there for a really long time. Like you could see the wheels were turning in her head. And the
Yeah.
book doesn't kind of steer you towards anything. It's just literally talking about all these different kids and how there's like a spectrum of, that the book doesn't even cover the wide range of gender identities. And she was like, I think I'm a boy and a girl. And she was only 3.5 at
Yeah.
that point. And that felt right to me at the time. It felt like that's where she was kind of at when I look back at like how she was at that point in time. And so, at that point, kids, like, I don't know if it's that they don't understand about pronouns or they just don't care because they're 3. There's no sense of like she needed to change pronouns. There's no sense of like needing to change names. But she very much was like, I'm both. And so I started to let her kind of explore clothing more. Like I would just kind of take her to the store and I wouldn't say like we're in the boys section or the girls section. I would just walk through the sections and be like, if you see anything you like, let me
Yeah,
know. And she was always gravitating towards the more feminine leaning
sure.
clothes. And so that's when things started to blow up more. So even though she had already been like painting the nails all the time, the hair was growing out. We had like Elsa come to her birthday party, the pretend play, jewelry and necklaces. It was like once, and this was like her second dress actually. Like once we got this like sparkly blue dress, and it was blue because that was her
Yeah,
favorite color at the time. That's when things like really started to blow up when it came to other people in her life being like,
yeah,
what is happening? And that's when she started to really kind of get that pushback against who she was. So even though she continued to kind of explore through clothing, she wasn't talking about it as much anymore at that point for probably like 6 months. She started just saying she was a boy again.
yeah,
And then I think once she got a little more confidence, then she came back to, well, no, I'm both. I'm both. And of course, then the pushback started to happen again at that point. There was a lot of
yeah,
pushback, but she was, thank God, her school is, oh, her preschool is wonderful. They've always been super, super supportive. And like, even when she was more vocally out and more wearing dresses like literally all the time, and the kids who had known her in the threes school, and when she came back in the fall and saw that she was more just like in dresses all the time at that point, they would come to the teachers to ask questions, and the teachers were like, well, what do you want us to say? And I turned to my kid and I was like, what do you want them to
yeah,
say? Because I wanted to make sure she had that agency. Like, what do you want them to say? And she's like, they should come to me and talk to me and I can explain it to them. Because she had a lot of people trying to tell her who she was and who she
yeah,
should be and who she was allowed to be and what was appropriate and what was okay and what would be accepted in society. And I always have been like, I can't tell you this.
yeah,
No one can tell you this. I said, what tells you who you are? I'm like, it's your heart and your head. Those are the only things that can tell you. I'm like, no one else can tell you this, but those two
yeah.
things. I was like, I said, be proud of who you are and don't listen to anyone else trying to tell you who you are. Only you get to decide that. No one else gets to make that decision for you.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Oh my god. I wish you were my mom. Okay. Well, like the whole trans people in sports fiasco, this has been coming for a while and has been one of the prongs of attack on trans rights from bigoted Republicans. There's a link in the show notes from a horrible ruling from the UK back in 2020, and you can look at how much ink the notably transphobic BBC gives to quote unquote getting it wrong and quote unquote detransitioning, with barely a mention to the thoughts of actual trans people. And it should be noted, as per episode 124 on the 2022 U.S. Trans Survey Results Part 4, that detransitioners make up a very small fraction of people who are nonetheless wielded like a weapon to deny care to all trans people. And the vast, vast majority only detransition because of how awful cis people make our lives. But heaven forbid a cis person make a mistake. They must be protected, and if that means all actual trans people have to suffer, then that's fine, apparently. Things have sadly only gotten much, much worse as attacks on trans people, specifically trans kids, have ramped up to an all-time high. Have a look at a link in the show notes about how bad things are for trans people in the US right now. 981 anti-trans bills have been introduced this year, 2025, so far. In fact, there is an anti-trans risk assessment map of the US in the text version of this essay at
Tilly'sTransTuesdays.com.
that I want you to look at and really sit with what it's showing you. There are only 5 states with strong protections for trans people, 8 with low risk within 2 years, 9 with moderate risk within 2 years, 2 at high risk, 24 at quote-unquote worst laws passed, and 2 at do not travel, those being Texas and Florida. And there's more data and maps than just those for kids. I encourage you to look through them all at the link. Browse through there. Look at what Republicans are doing to adults and to children, banning trans kids from sports, banning life-saving health care for trans kids. making it a crime to help a trans kid be happy and comfortable in their own body. But going back to that map for kids again, only 5 states still have strong protections for trans kids. Even ultra-liberal California, where I live, isn't great. Hospitals here have been capitulating to our fascist administration when they are not legally required to, even while gender-affirming care is still required to be covered by California state law. Link in the show notes about how LA Children's Hospital just stopped all care for trans kids. And yes, that is illegal under California law. But if no one in power does anything to stop them from denying care to trans kids, then the law actually protecting care for trans kids is meaningless.
And it's double awful because Children's Hospital LA, like, we go by their location every couple months or so. They used to fly a trans flag.
Yeah.
They used to have a trans flag out front, and now they're denying care. It's outrageous.
It is.
Yeah, I'm, and as you can imagine, many support groups for parents of trans kids. And I would say we're just all in a state of panic all day, every day. And I know for me, I wasn't sure if I was going to need to move where I live. And, you're watching all these executive orders that came in like the first month, which were all like face melting. Like just total face melting, like panic inducing, like, oh my God. And I always thought like, well, if I have to go, I'll go back to where I used to live in California. I'll go back there. Like that's the safe place.
Yeah.
And then when I saw that happen, it was like this total gut punch of like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Like, why? Of all places, you are the ones that are folding, and so quickly. I think they folded like within the first month, if that, of these executive orders coming out. It was like, what in the world is happening? And then all the Newsom insanity, and then the whole thing with like the troops on the streets, and I was just like, I guess California's out now as a place to go to somehow where I'm at, which you wouldn't think is safer, is somehow at this point, knock wood, safer, which is crazy. Makes absolutely no sense.
I mean, we do have a really good state attorney general and who is leading the charge on suing the Trump administration with a collection of like 10 or 15 states, I think, specifically for their laws making care for trans kids illegal. So they're suing them. So our AG is great. But our governor, Newsom, as you mentioned, he is really transphobic. And he's been agreeing with Republican propaganda on trans people because he thinks it'll help his election chances. There is a link in the show notes. And then where does that leave trans kids who need this life-saving care in California? Many of them are up a creek without a paddle.
And we should just take a moment here because I could feel the keyboard warriors wanting to yell at you about Newsom. All right, let me just give you a quick thing. Newsom has sat down with a ton of right-wingers on his stupid podcast to try to make friends with them.
Yep.
Newsom has destroyed homeless encampments with a smile.
Yep.
Newsom is an opportunistic piece of garbage.
Yes.
That will do whatever he thinks will make people like him in the short term.
Yeah.
He will not hold to anything that is right or good if it doesn't benefit him personally.
Yeah.
So y'all need to shut up.
We have lived here the whole time he has been governor.
We know who he is.
We do. And like nobody in California likes him.
Is another wishy-washy politician who will just do whatever things will get him some votes.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay.
And side note.
Okay, thank you. But I do want to note that life-saving care for trans kids is not hyperbole. From a link in the show notes, quote, data indicate that 82% of transgender individuals have considered killing themselves and 40% have attempted suicide, with suicidality highest among transgender youth, end quote. And again, it is not being trans that makes trans adults and trans kids suicidal. Dysphoria is absolutely awful. But if you affirm us and help us, it gets better. Trans care is life-saving. But it's how impossible cis society makes it to exist as a trans person in this world that is responsible for that. And again, listen to the 2022 U.S. Trans Report, Part 4 in episode 124 of this show, and learn all about what we're going through at the hands of cis people. The American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry all oppose this anti-trans legislation, and all of them agree that gender-affirming care is necessary and life-saving. Link in the show notes. And at a link in the show notes and the text version of this episode at
TeleTransTuesday.com.
there is a table from the American Medical Association from their paper titled Legislation to Criminalize Gender-Affirming Medical Care for Transgender Youth, showing that the American Medical Association, the American College of Physicians, American Academy of Family Physicians, American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, American Osteopathic Association, and the American Psychiatric Association, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the Endocrine Society, and the Pediatric Endocrine Society, and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health and U.S. Professional Association for Transgender Health all oppose the criminalization of transition care for trans kids. But bigoted Republicans think they know better than every legitimate professional medical organization. Does that sound familiar? With trans rights, with abortion rights, with COVID, it is effing atrocious. Even worse, all this anti-trans legislation literally causes brain damage in trans kids from the trauma it induces. Quote from a link in the show notes. Quote, interventions designed to prevent, halt, or reverse non-cisgender experiences are known as conversion therapy. The scientific consensus is that these practices are pseudoscientific, and experts on torture have identified these pseudoscientific practices as torture. As such, these interventions represent adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, which are scientifically demonstrated to cause brain damage, lifelong disabilities, and significantly shortened lifespans. End quote. So what happens when a kid of any age realizes they're transgender and wants to transition? Even though for prepubescent kids, they really only transition socially, it's obviously a very big decision, and it can be difficult for kids, especially the younger ones, to fully grasp everything that entails in the way life would change. But you see, medical professionals know that. They don't take a trans kid and send them off for surgery. The rates are so low that basically no trans kids are getting surgery. Quote from a link in the show notes. Quote, 2.1 per 100,000 minors aged 15 to 17 years, 0.1 per 100,000 minors aged 13 to 14 years, and 0 procedures among minors aged 12 years or younger. End quote. But intersex infants who cannot consent, Republicans want to perform surgery on them to make them conform to the gender binary. Here's another quote from a link in the show notes. Quote, intersex people in the United States are subjected to medical practices that can inflict irreversible physical and psychological harm on them starting in infancy, harms that can last throughout their lives. Many of these procedures are done with the stated aim of making it easier for the children to grow up quote-unquote normal and integrate more easily into society by helping them conform to a particular sex assignment. The results are often catastrophic, the supposed benefits are largely unproven, and there are generally no urgent health considerations at stake. Procedures that could be delayed until intersex children are old enough to decide whether they want them are instead performed on infants who then have to live with the consequences for a lifetime. End quote. Some bills banning gender-affirming care for trans kids have been scuttled by Republicans because the wording would have prevented surgeries they want to force on intersex kids, and they absolutely cannot have that. In fact, hormone replacement therapy used to be used in cis girls and boys to make them better conform to the rigid gender binary. Link in the show notes. In fact, cis boys are getting surgeries to help them conform to the binary, and nobody ever says they shouldn't be allowed or don't know what they're doing, or we have to wait to quote-unquote make sure it's what they really want. Here's a quote from another link in the show notes. Quote, the researchers found that out of the nearly 22.8 million minors who were insured in the United States and sought care in 2019, only 85 received any gender-affirming surgery. Approximately 96.4% of that sample had received a chest-related surgery, and these surgeries were largely restricted to minors between 15 and 17. No surgeries were done on minors under age 12. In a sample that combined transgender and cisgender minors, 150 breast reductions were done on youth. Of those, 146, or 97%, of these surgeries were done on cisgender boys who had gynecomastia, the medical term for unwanted breast development in cisgender males. End quote. It's so weirdly transparent. Let me direct you to episode 22 of this podcast, Cis People Get Gender-Affirming Healthcare Too. The hypocrisy of it all. Transitioning for kids largely involves social transitioning only, wearing clothes that reflect their true gender, name or pronoun changes, things of that nature. But some, probably many, also go on puberty blockers once they're old enough to need them to stop the wrong puberty. And many is relative here, mind you, as less than 1 in 1,000 adolescents are getting any kind of hormone treatment. Like the trans sports issue, it is a vanishingly small part of the population that we're talking about, though Republicans act like it's absolutely everywhere all the time. Link in the show notes.
So speaking of that with the hormones,
Yeah.
the place where we go, and at this point, obviously, it's just talk therapy like every 6 months, mainly for me.
Sure.
mainly support for me, just due to her age, but also like a place for her if she ever needs to talk to someone, just to know that there's someone there to help
Yeah.
with this particular aspect of her life. But they even said, like, of the kids that they see at this particular place, it's a small portion of those that they see that ever even do these medical interventions of
Right.
the blockers and the hormones. So it's not even like every kid whose gender doesn't match what they were assigned at birth. It's like an even smaller portion of those. And
Right.
as you know, from, I think you describe it later on in one of your essays, and what I'm aware of just of my own research of what we might have to go through when and if, because again, who knows
Yeah.
what she wants to do. It's intensive. It's not like they're like, oh, here you go. It's
Right.
like bone density scans, blood work, endocrinologists, pediatricians, the psychologists. It's like at least 5 or 6 appointments plus medical testing
Right.
before you can even get to the point of being approved for whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And then constant monitoring on top of it afterwards. It's not like they give you this and they send you off on your way and it's like, well,
Right.
hope it works out. It's like there's constant medical and psychological monitoring after it started.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can hear you folks out there saying kids can't make that decision. And I mean, they can actually. But did you know that puberty blockers are safe, have been used for cis kids for decades to stop precocious puberty, and are not permanent? 2 links in the show notes. And when you stop taking the blockers, guess what? Your body goes right back to making the hormone that was blocked. The puberty that was put on hold is no longer on hold and happens normally. It has no permanent effects whatsoever. When they're older, then they can add in hormone replacement therapy, as discussed in episode 110, if they want, and their body would then develop like a cis person's of their gender. Does it work? Does it make their lives better? Yes, it does. Quote from a link in the show notes. Quote, over the observation period, participants demonstrated significant improvements in appearance congruence, psychological well-being, social satisfaction, and self-efficacy, and significant reductions in negative affect and negative social perception. End quote. Karla, I wanted to ask, what was the difference, or did you even notice a difference in your kid from before and after socially transitioning, like mentally, emotionally? How did she change?
That's a really interesting question, because she was getting so much pushback in
Yeah.
those early years,
Right.
which created a lot of tension and anger on her part with the
Yeah, I
people
can
in her
imagine.
lives that were being like that. Again, I think that's part of why things like her name became such a sticking point for her, because she used to love her name. She used to
Yeah.
absolutely love it. And I thought that was like something she would never change. But once it got tied into who she was being visually and mentally thought of, it was like it had to go, unfortunately. I would say, as long as people see her, she's
Yeah.
happy. But if there's any part of it where they don't, she's not. She's like very unhappy, very, very
Yeah.
unhappy. And she's had some medical issues over the years. And one of the things that she's been able to kind of rely on is that joy of being able to just kind of be the girly girl that she is.
Yeah.
You know, like one of the things when she was really little, and there was this like beautiful little, like, you know how they make the dresses for kids of a certain age, they're like super like
Yeah.
flowy and like all the stuff, and she had tried it on, and I took a picture of it, but like, and I have the picture, and it's like she's kind of got the smile like this, and I was like, what's wrong? And she's like, well, my loved one, I obviously shouldn't say loved one, but she was like, my loved
Sure.
one is going to be disappointed in me for liking this and wanting this.
Yeah.
And I knew she was right, but she was only like 4 years old and having to deal with this. And so like I
Yeah, they
came,
know. They pick up
they
on it.
know, they pick up
Yeah.
on it. And I had mentioned it to this loved one. And I was like, well, you know, they thought this. And the person was like, well, yeah, they're right. I am disappointed. I am
Mm,
disappointed. And they were like, why are we taking this joy? Kind of like what you said about the cup. Like, why are we pooping on their joy? Like,
exactly.
why are we doing this? So like when she went to kindergarten, no one there knew her. So that was like the first place where like they hadn't kind of seen the transition. She went in as a girl. Everyone knew her as a girl. She was, you know, using the pronouns at that point, still had the old name because she hadn't decided to change it yet at that point.
Yeah.
And I think she felt more confident. I think she definitely felt more confident. And then, I mean, that was one of the reasons why we hesitated with sending her to the local public school, was because there were several reasons why we were worried about sending her there. You know, when we had talked to them about like what sort of support they could provide for her at that time,
Yeah.
they seemed more concerned about parental backlash
Mm,
than supporting our kid. And that, of course, that's like a major red flag, right? So that's why I sent
yeah.
her to a different public school. But also, like a lot of her friends who had known her since she was 3 and had seen the whole transition,
Yeah.
I was worried that they might inadvertently out her, not
Sure.
on purpose. And so, given the community that we live in, which is very Republican, very red, very Moms for Liberty, MAGA, that whole thing,
Mm,
I was worried about her safety there. And then, of course,
yeah.
because they were like, well, you're only allowed to use the nurse's bathroom for your child's safety and privacy, which really is like, no one's going to know. Like, who's going to know?
Yeah, and that's
And
so terrible. She'd
you're
feel so
sig
othered and
Yes,
yeah.
so you know, once they told me they were going to do that, and then like I was like, I can't send her there. Like it's too risky. It's just too
Yeah.
risky. So that's one of the reasons why she's cyberschooling right now, is to kind of protect her from
Yeah.
that. But yeah, as she's much more confident and happy when people see her for who she is.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I'm glad that she gets to have that.
Thank you.
Well, folks, let me remind you here of the utter hypocrisy of people peddling the trans people can't play sports with people of their true gender nonsense, because they say we would have had to transition before puberty for it to be fair, quote unquote fair, but they will not actually let anyone do that. And it is not unfair, again, for trans women to compete with cis women at all. We have the actual science to back it up. See Trans Sports 1 and 2 in episodes 125 and 126 to get the actual facts. So why not make kids wait to take hormone replacement therapy until they're 18? Yeah, let's talk about that. Because by 18, a lot of the body changes caused by hormones have already happened. Puberty blockers are impermanent. You know what's actually very permanent? The body changes from the wrong puberty. The whole point is to give trans kids the time to make that decision before their body goes through the actual irreversible changes of that wrong puberty. For me, I got taller, my shoulders and jawline broadened, I grew facial hair and more body hair, my voice deepened. Most of what adult trans women struggle with physically are the very things puberty blockers would have prevented. HRT cannot change any of those things. I mean, you're all familiar with what testosterone does to a body during puberty. You get the drift. If I'd had access to puberty blockers before that happened, think about all the dysphoria I have that could have been avoided. Those bodily changes would not have happened. Forcing a trans kid to go through a puberty that is antithetical to their gender is cruel. It is legitimately torture. It is forcing their body to change in ways that will make it more difficult for them to transition in the future and will dramatically worsen the dysphoria they may have. And again, dysphoria often comes with intense depression and anxiety and a lot of other mental health issues, including self-harm and sometimes people feeling like suicide is their only way out. Imagine kids already on puberty blockers who socially transitioned. A 14-year-old Tilly would have had no facial hair, been shorter, had narrower shoulders, a higher voice. She'd be dressing as a girl and treated as one because she would be perceived as a girl. And suddenly, without any recourse or warning, you take her puberty blockers away, quote unquote, for her own good? And now this 14-year-old girl gets facial hair and a deep voice, and her jaw and shoulders widen. And what the F do you think that's going to do to her? How is that helping her? You're turning her into the last thing she wants to be. It is unconscionable, especially given that if she discovers she's not actually trans or just doesn't want to medically transition, she can stop the puberty blockers and experience male puberty without any issues whatsoever. Thank you for being here, Karla.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All of this enrages me to no end, and it should enrage you too. Next week, we're going to talk about what's involved for most trans kids in actually accessing this care and the lengths good parents will go to in order to protect them. You need to hear it. Tilly Bridges, end transmission. Tilly's Trans Tuesdays is hosted by Tilly Bridges and Susan Bridges, with audio editing and sound mixing by Jillian Morgan. The written essay version of this week's topic and all past topics is available at tillystranstuesdays.com. Special thanks to Daisy and Jane for the use of Sorry Not Sorry as our show's theme music. Please stop by and show your support at daisyandjane.bandcamp.com and soundcloud.com/daisyandjane. You can find me at Tilly Bridges on Blue Sky and on Mastodon at tillybridges at mastodon.social, and you can find Susan on those at Susan L. Bridges. You can find Jillian at Audio Jillian on Blue Sky. You can join the Tillyverse Discord server by following the link at the very bottom of tillystranstuesdays.com. We hold regular watch parties for the Matrix films and other trans movies where I do a live Q&A, and it's blossomed into a wonderfully supportive, compassionate, kind community of friends. We'd love to have you join us. If you'd like to keep up with all the writing that Susan and I do, you can sign up for our newsletter at birdguestbroadcast.com. If you enjoy this show, please take a moment to leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts. The largest segment of our listeners find the show there, and more reviews equals a higher profile, which means it will reach more of the people who need it. Thank you for your support. For more information, visit pendantaudio.com. Thanks for listening.